Welcome to another video done drunk history style, which is basically where I tell the story of something that happened in the past while drinking a little bit of alcohol. This video was brought about by the fact that I was having one good conversation with a colleague about how social psychology can inform us about the ways we think about culture in our organizations, followed by another colleague telling me his favorite video was one of the other drunk histories, which I can link up there. And then I had friends from Sequoia actually provide me with a nice bottle of Cantillon, which I can't wait to open here, as well as I was introduced this last week to a professor studying the dynamics of power. And I thought this was just such a great opportunity to do a little bit of a drunk history on some of the more infamous power studies and authority studies and give you my 2 cents on them. So I hope you enjoy. Here we go. Woo! Yeah, look at that. Oh yeah. All right, let's get into it. So one of the first studies that I want to talk about today is the Stanford prison experiment. Basically, it was a study done in 1971 where this professor guy named Philip Zimbardo and his psychology research team got all of these participants together to participate in a study. And they claimed that it was a study about prison life. And they offered all of the participants something like $15 a day, which in 1971 was a really big deal, and an even bigger deal if you were a broke college student, which, come on, Stanford's never been cheap. They needed the money. So a lot of students signed up and joined this experiment. They then randomly assigned these individuals, some to be prisoners in the prison and some to be guards of the prison. They had all of these individuals there, and they actually arrested those that were randomly chosen to be the prisoners. So I mean, like, showed up to their house, arrested them for some crime, you know, robbery, this and that, and actually took them into the prison as if they were fully arrested. And when they got there, the prisoners were met by the other participants who had been assigned to be guards. And these guards were told that they had all sorts of authority. The only thing they couldn't do was deny food or physically harm the other prisoners. So the prisoners get there, and the guards actually force them to get completely naked and delouse them, and then put them into these like smock dress things, and even tied a chain around their ankles. And they have them sleeping in these rooms. And in fact, it wasn't like a actual prison. It was the basement of one of the buildings on the Stanford campus. But by doing all of these things, by arresting them, by taking away their identity from their clothing, by putting ankles and having them sleep in these rooms, and they even referred to every one of the prisoners not by their names, but by a number. They were really trying to strip away the identities of these individuals, with the notion that the research team wanted to look at how that de-individualization would affect them. They were also looking at how the guards behaved, you know, whether they would conform and fill their roles. And basically the study just went bad. Things started going crazy. 3 of the prisoners had to leave the study early because they were having all sorts of issues. The researchers themselves even called some of the actions being taken by the guards as sadistic in the way that they were treating the others. It was this really kind of crazy, horrible example of people performing in roles almost at their worst. And some of the takeaways were really intriguing because you had instances like, oh, there was this one prisoner who decided that they wanted to apply for parole. And they were like, oh, I'll even forego my pay if the board will just approve my parole, which was kind of crazy because this was an experiment. And supposedly all the participants had to do was say, I quit. And then they would have been exited in the same exact way, still lost their pay. So the fact that the prisoner was willing to apply for parole and wait for a hearing on whether or not he'd be paroled to leave and lose his money, instead of just quitting, walking out and losing the money, was a little interesting, like how much of these people conform to their roles and their identities within this experiment. And so, which brings me to the next thing. I'm not sure I like calling this an experiment. Everyone refers to this study as the Stanford prison experiment. And while it definitely opened people's eyes up to the world of psychology and what we can learn about power, authority, and maybe even systems such as the prison system, I'd say that it was incredibly unethical for the way that people were treated and how they were let to potentially be damaged by the outcomes of this study. And not only that, but this thing didn't even follow any good research practices. I mean, come on, what was the observable variable? What were the controls? Where was the control group? So many reasons why I think this is actually a pretty shoddy experiment. But that being said, it is a pretty salacious study that really opens people's eyes up to how one thinks in these kind of situations. And this study, I think, really came about on the heels of one that happened about a decade before at Yale, by this guy named Milgram, where this guy convinced participants to, one, serve as a teacher, and one, be the student who was learning. Now, really, the student was a Confederate, someone that the researcher staged there. And the teacher was being told that every time the student got a question wrong, that the teacher would have to administer a shock to them. Now, this was under the concept of, you know, hey, how can we help them learn? How can we help them understand and do better? So every time this student who was perceived as another participant, just like the teacher, would get a question wrong, the teacher would have to shock them. And the teacher would do this every time. And the other student, who was a Confederate or an actor, was actually starting to yell and starting to cry out and saying, please, please don't shock me. Oh, it hurts. And the participants were told to continue. This is part of the study. You need to shock them. And they were really trying to see how far these participants who were playing the role of teacher would go. And these participants were hitting that shock button over and over again. They were looking at the researcher in the room who was telling them, no, you must continue. This is part of the study. And they weren't fighting back against that authority. They were doing what the researcher said, even though there was a person on the other side yelling and crying for help and saying that they were having, you know, potentially issues and going to be hurt traumatically if they continued. And a lot of the participants would still continue to press the shock. So really scary. This whole, in fact, I need a drink. These whole experiments scare me for multiple reasons. One, it makes you wonder what people are really capable of when they don't question authority. And two, it makes me think of how broke I was as a college student and how quickly I would have signed up for a study that paid me any form of money. And then I could have been shocked or put in prison or who knows what, except that I'm lucky enough that I went to college after we already had institutional review boards and ethics committees in place to help take care of these kind of things. So I bring these up because I think that there is a really interesting field around how power and authority play into culture and the ways of how people fit into the norms and the roles in their own workplaces. So I bring that up so that those of you thinking about people at work really think about the impact the norms, the rules, and the authority are creating in your workplace and how people are reacting to them. I also bring them up to say, I'm so glad we are doing slightly better on the ethical research front. In fact, I kind of don't think that you should take any of the Stanford prison experiment or the Milgram study on obedience as true science. They've been debunked, or rather not been able to be replicated by other scientists. There's some other fairly good ones out there. So if you're truly interested in the research on power and authority, definitely look into some of the more substantiated science, because there's some really good stuff in there. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this story of a little bit of psychology from the past as much as I am enjoying this. Thanks very much for joining me. If you like this video and you want another one in drunk history style, I'll put the link up there. And also, for those who've been watching regularly, I'm gonna tone it down a bit from the weekly videos and gonna start just putting up 2 videos a month. So don't worry, you'll still get plenty from me, just on a slightly different schedule. So I hope you'll hit the subscribe button so that you can know when the next one comes out. Cheers.